They put a price on me like I was nothing. They had no idea who was sitting in the back of that room. The auctioneer's voice was a flat drone, reciting my age, my bloodline, my supposed weaknesses. The bids started low. A few hundred from the ranchers, 1,000 from a merchant with cold eyes. Then a voice from the back, calm, deep. It said a number that didn't make sense. They put a price on me like I was nothing. The auctioneer's voice was a flat drone, reciting my age, my bloodline, my supposed weaknesses. 24 years. Omega female, unbonded, no offspring. The words fell like stones into still water, each one sending ripples through the crowd that I could feel but not see. I kept my eyes on my boots, on the scuffed leather that had carried me through 3 winters and 2 moves and 1 funeral. The locket at my throat felt heavier than it had this morning. My father had been dead for 11 months. The pack's debts had been mounting for longer. Marcus Thorne had been calculating the exact moment to move for at least 6 of those months. I knew this because I had watched him do it. I had seen the way his cold, flat blue eyes tracked me during pack gatherings, the way his heavy, jowled jaw tightened when my father's name was mentioned. I had seen him write numbers in a ledger, with the same hand that now clasped a heavy gold signet ring on his right pinky. He stood at the front of the hall now, hands clasped behind his back, chest puffed, watching the auction like a man who had already counted the money. The bid started low. A few hundred from the ranchers, 1,000 from a merchant with cold eyes who looked at me the way a man looks at livestock. 1,500 from a woman in a grey dress, who seemed almost apologetic about it. The numbers were small, dismissive, the kind of sums you offer for something you do not intend to keep. The auctioneer's voice did not change register. He had done this before. Many times. I had been to 3 auctions before this one. I had watched other Omegas stand on this same block, hands clasped, eyes down, while the crowd decided their value. I had watched them walk away with strangers, their faces blank, their futures already written. I had never imagined I would be the one standing here. My fingers tightened around the locket. My mother's face was inside it, faded and creased, the photograph older than I was. She had died when I was 7. My father had never remarried. He had carried her memory like a wound that would not heal, and he had carried me like a promise he intended to keep. The locket was the only thing of hers I had left, and I had worn it every day since the funeral. It was the only thing I owned that Marcus Thorne could not sell. The auctioneer called for the next bid. The crowd murmured. A man in the front row raised a numbered paddle. 2,000. I felt something shift in the air, a stillness that had not been there before. The murmurs softened, then stopped. The auctioneer's hand froze mid-gesture. I lifted my gaze slowly, my eyes moving across the blur of faces in the audience, and I saw what they had all seen. A figure rising from a chair in the far corner of the hall. A chair that had been empty when the auction began. A figure that had been sitting in shadow, watching, waiting, while the bids climbed and fell and climbed again. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of build that did not need to announce itself because the space around it already knew. He wore a simple dark brown leather duster coat, over a cream linen shirt, dark denim trousers, worn brown leather cowboy boots. A plain silver band on his left ring finger caught the light as he moved. His posture was relaxed but coiled, a stillness that suggested immense control. His eyes were amber gold, striking, unforgiving. They fixed on the auctioneer with a calm that was more terrifying than any anger could have been. The auctioneer's voice cracked. "Sir, the bidding is—" The man spoke. His voice was deep, unhurried, the kind of voice that had been giving orders for so long that it no longer needed to raise itself. 30,000? The hall went silent, not the silence of respect, the silence of something breaking. 30,000 was not a bid. 30,000 was a statement. 30,000 was more than the entire pack had earned in the last fiscal quarter. 30,000 was the kind of number that did not exist in this hall, in this town, in this world. The auctioneer's hand trembled. The man in the front row lowered his paddle. The merchant with cold eyes looked away. I turned my head sharply toward the back of the hall, my eyes widening, my breath catching in my throat. The figure stepped forward into the light, and I saw his face for the first time. Strong, clean-shaven, a square jaw, a thin scar running from his left temple to his cheekbone, barely visible in the dim light. His amber eyes met mine, and something flickered in them. Recognition. Not the recognition of a stranger, seeing a face he had seen before. The recognition of someone who had been looking for a long time and had finally found what he was searching for. I did not know him. I had never seen him before. But something in his gaze told me that he knew me, that he had known me for longer than I could imagine. Marcus Thorne's face drained of color. His ruddy, weathered skin went gray. His hands unclasped from behind his back and fell to his sides, limp and useless. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if his legs had forgotten how to move. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. The man stepped onto the low, wooden stage. He did not look at Marcus Thorne. He did not look at the auctioneer. He looked at me. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only the first few rows could hear, but the silence carried it to every corner of the hall. "The bidding is over." He turned to face the crowd. His amber eyes swept across them like a blade. "This auction is concluded. The sum I named is final. Any further bids will be considered a challenge to the throne." The throne. The word landed like a stone in still water. The ripples spread through the crowd in murmurs, in gasps, in the scraping of chairs as people stood to get a better look. The pack elders in the front row stared with shock frozen on their faces. A middle-aged beta woman in a grey dress pressed her hand to her mouth. Two young male alphas in work jackets sat with their eyes wide, their mouths open. The man turned back to me. He extended his hand. His palm was calloused, his fingers long and steady. He did not ask. He did not command. He simply held out his hand and waited. I looked at his hand. I looked at my boots. I looked at the locket at my throat. I took his hand. His grip was firm but gentle. He helped me down from the block, his hand steady under my elbow as my knees threatened to give way. The crowd parted as we walked through them. No one spoke, no one moved. The only sound was the scuff of my boots on the worn plank floor and the rustle of his leather coat. Marcus Thorne stood frozen in the aisle, his face a mask of disbelief. The man did not acknowledge him. He did not slow down. He walked past him as if he were already a ghost. At the door, I looked back. The hall was still. The auctioneer stood at his podium, gripping it with both hands, his face pale. The pack elders sat in their chairs, their hands folded in their laps, their eyes fixed on the empty block. Marcus Thorne had not moved. He stood where we had left him, his hands at his sides, his gold signet ring catching the light. The man held the door open for me. I stepped through it into the cold night air, and the door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded louder than anything I had heard all day. In the hallway, the silence was different. It was not the silence of a room holding its breath. It was the silence of a space that had been waiting for us. The man stopped. He turned to face me. His amber eyes were softer now, the edges of that stillness eased by something that looked almost like relief. "My name is Kaelin Ashford," he said. "I knew your father." The words did not make sense. They could not make sense. My father had been a quiet man, a pack accountant, a man who kept to himself, and paid his debts on time and never spoke of his past. He had not known anyone important. He had not known the Alpha King. But the man standing before me wore a plain silver band on his left ring finger. He carried a small, worn, leather-bound journal in his breast pocket. He stood with his weight balanced, his shoulders back, his gaze steady, and I knew, with a certainty that settled in my chest like a stone, that I had been rescued by someone who had been watching over me for longer than I had been alive. The Alpha King, Kaelin Ashford, stood before me, his amber eyes fixed on mine, and the room held its breath. Kaelin Ashford stepped into the light, and the room forgot how to breathe. His boots made a sound on the worn plank floor that was different from every other footstep that had crossed it that night. Deliberate, unhurried, the step of a man who had never needed to rush toward anything, because everything he wanted had always waited for him. The single bare bulb above the auction block caught the silver in his dark chestnut hair. The slight tousle that suggested he had run his hand through it once, maybe twice, on the way here. His amber gold eyes moved across the crowd with a stillness that was not calm, but something more controlled. The stillness of a predator who had already decided and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. "The bidding is over," he said. The auctioneer's hand froze mid-gesture, his mouth still open around a word that never arrived. The numbered paddle in the front row lowered slowly, like a flag at dusk. The murmurs that had filled the hall since the first bid collapsed into a silence so complete that Alara could hear the dust settling on the rafters above her. Marcus Thorne rose from his seat in the second row. His ruddy face had gone the color of old parchment, the jowls beneath his jaw trembling as he found his voice. "Your Majesty," he said, and the title landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. "This is a pack matter. The Crown has no jurisdiction over internal asset liquidation." Kaelin did not look at him. His eyes had found Alara on the block, and something in them shifted, a flicker of recognition that she could not place, could not explain, could not reconcile with the fact that she had never seen this man before in her life. He was looking at her the way someone looks at a photograph they have carried in their pocket for years and finally seen in person. "The Crown has jurisdiction over anything I choose to have jurisdiction over," Kaelin said, still not looking at Thorne. "And I choose this." The silence cracked. A murmur moved through the crowd like wind through dry grass. Low, urgent, carrying pieces of words that Alara couldn't quite catch. She stood frozen on the block, her fingers still wrapped around the silver locket at her throat, her thin, arched eyebrows drawn together in something that was not quite confusion and not quite fear, but lived somewhere in the narrow space between them. Caelan walked toward the auction block. The crowd parted for him without being asked, without being told, the way water parts around a stone. He moved with a relaxed, coiled grace that suggested immense control held in reserve. The posture of a man who had never needed to prove anything, because the proof was written in every room he had ever entered. He stopped at the base of the block and looked up at her. "Ilara Voss," he said, not a question, a confirmation. She nodded. The movement was small, barely perceptible, but he saw it. "Come down from there." His hand extended toward her, palm open, fingers relaxed, the plain silver band on his left ring finger catching the light. She looked at his hand for a long moment, then at his face, then at the crowd behind him. Every eye in the room was on her. Every breath in the room was waiting. She took his hand. His grip was firm but gentle, the grip of someone who had held many hands and learned exactly how much pressure was enough. She stepped off the block and onto the floor, and the moment her boots touched the wood, something shifted in the room. A collective exhale, a release of tension that had been building since the first bid. "Your Majesty," Marcus Thorne said again, and this time his voice had an edge to it, the thin sharpness of a man who was losing control and knew it. "This is highly irregular. The sale has been recorded. The funds have been allocated. The Pack Council will need to—" "The Pack Council," Caelan said, finally turning to face him, "can take it up with me directly. I will be at the capital for the next 3 weeks. My schedule is available through the usual channels." He said it the way a man tells a child that the store is closed. No heat, no anger, just the flat finality of a door that had been closed and locked. Thorne's jaw worked silently for a moment. The heavy gold signet ring on his right pinky caught the light as his hand clenched and unclenched at his side. He looked at Ilara, and something cold passed across his face. Not hatred, not anger, but the specific resentment of a man who had made a plan and watched it fail because he had not accounted for something he should have accounted for. She held his gaze. She did not flinch. Caelan's hand remained on her elbow, light but present, and he guided her through the crowd. The faces blurred past her, the ranchers who had bid on her, the merchants who had calculated her value, the pack elders who had sat in silence while she was sold. She saw them all and remembered none of them. What she remembered was the weight of the Alpha King's hand on her arm, steady and warm, and the way the crowd parted and did not close behind them. The hallway outside the auction hall was dim and narrow, the walls lined with faded photographs of pack leaders she did not recognize. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence of the hall was replaced by the silence of an empty corridor, different in texture, softer at the edges, but still heavy with everything that had just happened. Caelan released her elbow and turned to face her. "You have questions," he said. She had 1,000 questions. She had none. What she had was a single sentence that had been forming in her chest since the moment she heard his voice from the back of the room, and it came out before she could stop it. Why? He looked at her for a long moment. His amber gold eyes were unreadable, but there was something in them that she recognized. A weight, a weariness, the particular exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a secret for longer than they had meant to. "Your father saved my life," he said. 18 years ago, on the northern border, a hunting accident that was not an accident. He pulled me out of a ravine while the men who had set the trap were still watching from the ridge. I was 23. He was 34. He told me never to speak of it, and I never did. Ilara's hand found the locket at her throat. Her mother's locket, the only thing her father had left her besides the debt. He died 3 months later, Kaylin continued. The official record said a heart condition. The unofficial record, the one I kept, said something else. He was silenced, Ilara, because he knew something about the people who set that trap, because he knew who was selling omegas across the territories, and he was about to name them. The words landed like stones in her chest, one after another, each heavier than the last. She thought of her father's last months, the sleepless nights, the doors that he checked twice before locking, the way he had looked at her the last time she saw him, as if he was memorizing her face. I have been watching over you from a distance, Kaylin said, making sure the debt collectors did not push too hard, making sure the pack did not sell you to someone who would hurt you. I thought I had more time. I thought the auction would not happen for another year at least. He paused. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, she saw something in his face that was not control. Something raw and unguarded, the ghost of a guilt he had been carrying for a long time. I was wrong. I should have come sooner. I should have told you the truth the day your father died. But I made a promise to him, and I kept it longer than I should have. Ilara stood in the dim corridor, the silver locket warm against her skin, and felt something shift inside her. A tectonic movement, slow and deep, the kind of change that happens before you know it has happened. I am no longer a debt to be sold, she said. Not a question, a statement. No, Kaylin said. You are not. The words hung in the air between them, simple and enormous, and for the first time in 11 years, Ilara Voss looked at a future that did not begin with a number and end with a sale. Darian Cole appeared at the end of the hallway, his dark brown eyes wide, his tan face flushed, his brass compass swinging against his chest as he walked toward them. He stopped a few feet away, his weight shifting from one foot to the other, his jaw tight with something that was either anger or relief or both. You left without me, he said. Ilara looked at him, at the boy who had been her friend when no one else would look at her, who had sat beside her at her father's funeral when the rest of the pack had stayed home, who had never once treated her like she was less. I didn't know if you would come, she said. Darian's jaw tightened further, then relaxed. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. Wherever you go, he said, I go. Kaylin watched the exchange in silence, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, a small movement that carried the weight of a decision. Then we go together. The black sedan waited outside the compound gates, its engine running, its windows dark. Ilara climbed into the back seat without looking back. Darian sat beside her, his hands clasped in his lap, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Kaylin took the driver's seat, and the car pulled away from the packlands without ceremony, without farewell, without a single word of goodbye. The compound shrank in the rear-view mirror. First a collection of buildings, then a cluster of lights, then a smudge on the horizon that could have been anything or nothing. Ilara watched it disappear, and for the first time in 11 years, she did not look back. Ilara, standing in the quiet hallway, asked Kaylin why he came. The words had left her mouth before she could stop them, a raw and broken thing that hung in the stale air between them. She had not meant to speak. She had meant to follow, to be silent, to disappear into whatever future had been purchased for her. But the question was already out, and she could not call it back. Kaylin stopped. He turned slowly, his boots making a soft sound on the worn wooden floor. The amber gold eyes caught the dim light of the single bulb swinging overhead, and for a moment he said nothing. He simply looked at her, and she felt the full weight of that gaze. Not predatory, not possessive, but something older, something that had been waiting. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the small, worn, leather-bound journal. His hands were steady as he opened it to a marked page, and he held it out to her without a word. Ilara took it. Her fingers, still trembling, traced the yellowed paper. The handwriting was her father's. It was unmistakable. The tight, cramped script, the slight tilt to the right, the way he pressed so hard the pen had left grooves in the page. She had seen it 1,000 times, on grocery lists, on birthday cards, on the final letter he had written her before the accident. But this was not a letter. It was a record. A single line dated 18 years ago, written in the same careful hand. Kaylin Ashford, Alpha King. Blood debt. Life for life. Below it, a single word in red ink. Paid. Kaylin spoke quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years. Your father saved my life in a fire that should have killed us both. I was young then, foolish, and I made a mistake that cost 7 men their lives. He pulled me from the wreckage when no one else would. He carried me 3 miles through the smoke to a healer. And when I asked what I owed him, he told me to protect his family. That was the only price he ever named. Ilara's hand went to the silver locket at her throat. Her mother's locket, the one her father had given her on her 13th birthday, the day before he died. She had never known what it meant. She had only known that he had pressed it into her palm with a look she could not read and told her to keep it close. She looked up at Kaylin. Marcus knew. It was not a question. Kaylin's jaw tightened. The restraint in his posture, the coiled stillness, became something harder. Marcus Thorne was present at the fire. He saw what your father did. He knew of the oath. And he chose to auction you anyway, in open violation of the blood bond, because he believed I would not find out. He believed the debt was forgotten. He believed you were small enough to sell. The word hung in the air like a blade. Small. She had been small her entire life, the smallest omega in a pack of alphas who measured worth in muscle and land. The daughter of a dead man whose debts had been tallied and sold. She had learned to make herself smaller still, to tuck her chin, to roll her shoulders forward, to take up as little space as possible so that no one would notice her. No one would want her. No one would put a price on what remained. But someone had noticed. Someone had been watching. Darian Cole stepped out of the shadows behind her, the brass compass swinging from the leather cord around his neck. His dark eyes were fixed on Kaylin, and there was a tension in his wiry frame that Ilara recognized. The same tension that had been there when they were children, when he had stood between her and the older alphas who wanted to take her lunch money. He had not changed. He had only learned to hide it better. You knew, Darian said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the flat precision of someone who had spent years watching and saying nothing. Kaelin met his gaze. I knew she existed. I knew she had been taken. I did not know the auction would happen today until the morning of. Marcus moved faster than I anticipated. He thought a closed sale, a quick transaction, would be done before anyone could stop it. Then why did you come? Ilara asked again, her voice steadier now. You paid the debt. You could have let me go. You could have sent someone else. Kaelin's eyes softened. The amber gold lost some of its edge, and for a moment he looked almost tired. Because your father asked me to watch over you, not to buy you. And because I have spent the last 11 years watching from a distance, waiting for the moment you would need someone to stand beside you, not above you. Beside you. He stepped closer, and Ilara did not flinch. Marcus Thorne did not just sell an Omega today. He insulted a blood oath, and through it, the throne itself. The council will convene within the week, and the records of every sale he has overseen will be brought to light. This is not the end of something. This is the beginning. The hallway was silent. The distant murmur of the crowd in the auction hall was a low hum, like water over stones. But here there was only the three of them. The small Omega, the wiry Beta, the Alpha King. Darian shifted his weight. What happens to us now? Kaelin looked at Ilara. That is her choice. Ilara's fingers tightened around the locket. She could feel the warmth of it against her palm, the faint impression of the engraving on the inside. She had never opened it. She had been afraid of what she might find. But now she knew. I want to see the dossier, she said. The records, all of them. Kaelin nodded once. I expected you would. He turned and walked down the hallway, his boots making that same soft sound on the wood. Ilara followed, and Darian fell into step beside her. She could feel his presence, solid and familiar, a warmth at her shoulder. As they stepped out into the cold air of the compound yard, the black sedan waiting with its engine running, Ilara looked back. The auction hall was a dark shape against the grey sky, its windows like empty eyes. She had walked in through those doors as property. She was walking out as something else. The sedan's door opened, and she climbed in without hesitation. The seat was warm. The leather smelled clean. Darian slid in beside her, the brass compass catching the light as he settled. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Kaelin took the front passenger seat, and the driver, a silent Beta with a shaved head, pulled away without a word. The compound shrank in the rear-view mirror, the gates closing behind them, and Ilara watched it until it was nothing more than a smudge on the horizon. She did not feel relief. She felt something harder, something colder, something that had been sleeping in her chest since the day her father died, and was now waking up. She was no longer a debt to be sold. She was a witness, and she was going to speak. The black sedan smelled of old leather and something clean, something that did not belong to the Pack compound. Ilara Voss sat in the back seat, with her hands folded in her lap, the frayed hem of her grey wool dress brushing against her knees. The silver locket rested against her collarbone, warm from her skin. Through the window, the compound shrank in the rear-view mirror, a cluster of wooden buildings and bare bulbs, the auction hall where she had stood on the block, the faces of the Pack elders still frozen in their shock. Darian Cole sat beside her, his brown canvas jacket creased at the elbows, the small brass compass hanging from the leather cord around his neck. catching the dim light. He had not spoken since they left. His jaw was tight, his dark eyes fixed on the road ahead. She could feel the tension in him, the weight of the choice he had made, to leave the only pack he had known, to follow her into something he did not yet understand. Kaelin Ashford drove. The Alpha King's hands rested on the wheel with a quiet stillness. His dark chestnut hair threaded with silver at the temples, his amber gold eyes scanning the road ahead. He had not looked back. He did not need to. The compound was already behind them, and he had made his decision the moment he rose from that shadowed chair. The road unspooled through flat, empty land. Fields of dry grass, fences sagging with age, the occasional farmhouse with a single light in the window. Elara watched it pass, the miles accumulating like pages turning in a book she had never read. She had never left the Packlands. She had never seen a city. The world beyond the compound was a rumor, a story told by traders and travelers, something that happened to other people. The sedan hummed beneath them, steady and patient. "We'll reach the capital by nightfall," Kaelin said. His voice was calm, unhurried, the same voice that had named a number that silenced the auction hall. "There's a lot you need to see." Elara did not answer. She was still processing the weight of what had happened. The auction block, the bids, the voice from the back of the room, the walk down from the stage with Kaelin's hand at her elbow. The moment Marcus Thorne's face had drained of colour, the moment she had stepped out of the hall and into the cold night air and realised she was not going back. Darian shifted beside her. "You could have told me." She turned to look at him. His jaw was set, his dark brown eyes fixed on the window. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know about the oath. I didn't know about any of it." He let out a breath, slow and controlled. "I know." The silence between them was not anger. It was the gap between what they had been and what they were becoming. Darian had grown up in the pack with her, had watched her shrink into herself, had stood by while the elders decided her fate. He had not stopped it. He could not have. But he had left. That was something. The landscape began to change as the hours passed. The flat fields gave way to rolling hills, then to clusters of buildings that grew denser with every mile. The first signs of the capital appeared. A highway with streetlights, billboards, advertising things she had never heard of. Cars moving in streams of red and white. Elara pressed her face to the window, her pale grey eyes wide. The city rose from the earth like something that had been dreaming for centuries. Glass towers caught the last light of the sun, their surfaces reflecting the sky in fractured pieces. Bridges arched over rivers she could not name. People moved along sidewalks in waves, their faces turned toward destinations she could not imagine. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Kaelin's estate sat at the edge of the city, a compound of grey stone and dark iron gates that opened without a sound. The sedan rolled through, past guards who nodded once, past a courtyard with a single fountain that had frozen over for the winter. The main house was low and wide, its windows warm with light, its walls built to last. Elara stepped out of the car, her scuffed black leather boots meeting the gravel. She stood still, her shoulders rolled forward, her hands clasped in front of her. The air was different here, cleaner, thinner, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and stone. A woman emerged from the house. She was tall and sharp-eyed, with cropped dark hair and a scar that ran from her left eyebrow to her cheekbone. She wore a fitted grey jacket and carried a tablet in one hand. Her gaze swept over Elara and Darian with the efficiency of someone who had been expecting them. "This is Sarah," Kaelin said. "She runs my household. She'll show you to your rooms." Sarah nodded once. "Follow me." The house was quiet inside. Wood-paneled walls, high ceilings, a fireplace that crackled in the main hall. Elara followed Sarah down a corridor, past closed doors and framed photographs. She did not stop to examine. Her room was at the end of the hall, a simple space with a bed, a desk, a window that looked out over the frozen fountain. "There are clothes in the wardrobe," Sarah said. "Fresh ones. You'll want to change before dinner." Elara stood in the center of the room, her hands at her sides. She did not know what to do with herself. The silence was different here, not the heavy, waiting silence of the pack compound, but something open, something that did not press against her. Dinner was served in a small dining room with a long wooden table and candles that flickered in the draught. Kaelin sat at the head, Sarah at his right, a grizzled alpha named Corvin at his left. Elara and Darian sat across from each other, the plates of food untouched in front of them. Kaelin set down his fork. "You need to understand what you're now part of." He slid a dossier across the table. It was thick, bound in dark leather, its pages filled with names and dates and numbers. Elara opened it. The first page listed a sale, an Omega named Lena, sold to a pack in the Northern Territories for 3,000 credits. The second page listed another. The third. The pages went on, each one a life reduced to a transaction. "The auction was not a local scandal," Kaelin said. "It's a network. Packs across the territories have been selling Omegas for years, under the table, through intermediaries, using debt as cover. Your pack was one node in a system that stretches from here to the coast." Elara's hand had started to shake. She set the dossier down very carefully, the same way she had set down the cup in the auction hall. "My father," she said, "his death." Kaelin's amber gold eyes met hers. He found out. He was going to expose it. They silenced him. The words hung in the air, cold and final. Elara felt something shift inside her, not grief, not rage, but a clarity that cut through everything. Her father had not died in an accident. He had died because he knew the truth. And he had left her the only thing he could, a blood oath that bound the Alpha King to protect her. "You're not just rescued," Kaelin said. "You're now a witness. The evidence you carry, your testimony, your presence here, it's what we need to dismantle the network. But it means facing the people who sold you. It means standing in front of the council and telling them what happened." Elara looked down at the dossier, at the names and numbers that represented years of stolen lives. She thought of the auction block, of the bids, of the moment she had been nothing. She thought of her father, of the courage it must have taken to carry that secret, to pay that debt. "I'll do it," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was steady. The first time in years she had spoken without fear. Kaelin nodded. "Then we start tomorrow." Later, after dinner, Elara stood on the balcony of her room. The city stretched out before her, a sea of lights that pulsed and breathed. The cold air bit at her cheeks, but she did not move. She touched the silver locket at her throat, her mother's always present, and felt the weight of everything behind her and everything ahead. They had put a price on her like she was nothing. They had no idea who was sitting in the back of that room. Neither did she. But she was beginning to learn. Caelan laid the dossier flat on the oak table between them, his hand resting on the cover. The leather was worn, the pages yellowed at the edges. I had been staring at it for 10 minutes, maybe longer. The names on the first page were familiar. Pack elders, regional governors. A man I had seen at my father's funeral, offering condolences with eyes that never once looked sorry. There are 47 pages, Caelan said quietly. Each one is a transaction. Each one is a life. I did not ask him how long he had been collecting them. The answer was written in the condition of the paper, in the careful annotations in his own hand along the margins. Years. He had been watching for years. Sarah stood by the window, her arms crossed, her eyes tracking the movement of guards on the perimeter. Corvin sat at the far end of the table, a cup of cold tea untouched in front of him. Darian had positioned himself near the door, his weight on one hip, the brass compass hanging from his neck, catching the low light. No one spoke. They were waiting for me to say something. I turned to page 2. A sale from 3 years ago. An Omega female, 19 years old, sold to a textile operation in the Northern Territories. The buyer's name was listed, the price, the date, the notation at the bottom, in Caelan's handwriting. Subject reported missing 6 months later. No investigation. Page 3. A male Omega, 22, sold to a construction firm. Same notation. Subject reported missing. No investigation. I closed the dossier. My hand was steady. I had expected to feel rage, or grief, or something sharp and overwhelming. Instead, I felt a cold clarity, like the air just before snowfall. I had been standing on that block thinking I was nothing. I had been wrong. I was evidence. Your father, Caelan said, came to me 4 months before he died. He had found the first thread, a single sale, a woman from his own pack who had been taken in the night and sold to a buyer 3 territories away. He traced it as far as he could alone. Then he brought it to me. I looked up from the dossier, and someone killed him for it. Caelan did not look away. I believe so. I cannot prove it, but I believe so. The room was silent. I could feel Darian's eyes on me, the weight of his concern. I did not meet them. Instead, I looked at the locket at my throat, the silver warm against my skin. My mother's face on one side, empty on the other. My father had never told me what he was doing. He had never told me he was brave. How many are still alive? I asked. Caelan's jaw tightened. Of the ones I have records for, less than half. The network does not keep its assets long. They are sold, used, and discarded. The profit is in the turnover. And the buyers? Some are pack leaders, some are merchants, some are people you would never suspect. He opened the dossier to a page near the back. This one is a school administrator. 2 transactions, both Omegas under 18. I felt something shift in my chest, not anger. Something colder, something that had been building since the moment I stepped onto that block. Then we stopped them, I said. Caelan looked at me for a long moment. His amber eyes were unreadable, but I saw something flicker there. Recognition, maybe, or the quiet acknowledgement of a decision already made. The council meets in 3 days, he said. I can call a session, present the evidence, but the council is made up of pack leaders. Some of them are on these pages. Some of them are the buyers. Then we don't give them time to hide. Corvin set down his cup. And what do you plan to do, girl? Walk in and name them one by one? Yes. The word hung in the air. I saw Darian shift, his hand moving to the compass at his neck. Sarah turned from the window, her expression unreadable. Corvin let out a low breath. Caelan did not smile, but he nodded. 3 days, he said. I will have the chamber prepared. The council chamber was a vast, circular room with high windows that let in the grey light of an overcast morning. The pack leaders sat in tiers of dark wood, their faces arranged in descending rows like the seats of an amphitheatre. I stood at the centre, on a raised dais of polished stone, the same position I had occupied on the auction block. The geometry was the same. The power was not. Marcus Thorne was in the 3rd row, flanked by 2 guards. His suit was rumpled, his silver hair dishevelled, his cold blue eyes fixed on me with a hatred that he did not bother to conceal. He had been arrested the night before, processed, and brought here in chains. The council had not been told why. Caelan stood at the podium, his voice calm and measured as he read the first page of the dossier aloud. The names, the dates, the prices, the notations. The silence that followed each entry was a living thing, pressing against the walls, filling the space between breaths. When he finished, he stepped back. The evidence has been verified by my own investigators. The transactions span 7 territories, 11 packs, and 5 years. The total number of Omegas sold through this network is 217. The number confirmed deceased is 93. A murmur moved through the tiers. A woman in the front row, her face pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. A man in the back, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. I watched them. I watched all of them. The floor is yours, Caelan said, and he looked at me. I stepped forward. My boots made a sound on the stone, a soft scuff that seemed impossibly loud in the silence. I did not look at Marcus Thorne. I did not look at the council. I looked at the locket in my hand, the silver cool against my palm, and I thought of my father, the way he had hugged me the last time I saw him, the way he had said, "Be brave," without ever telling me why. 217, I said. My voice was steady. 93 dead. The rest are missing. And every single one of them was sold by someone in this room. The silence cracked. A voice from the 4th row, sharp and defensive. You have no proof that... I have the dossier, I said. I have the records. I have the names of the buyers, the dates of the sales, and the notation in the Alpha King's own hand of every report that was never filed. I turned to face the man who had spoken. He was a pack elder, his face reddening, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Do you want me to read your name aloud? He did not answer. I let the silence hold. Then I turned back to the council. My father was killed because he found the first thread. He brought it to Caelan Ashford, and he was killed for it. I was sold on a block because Marcus Thorne knew that if I was gone, the thread would die with me. I paused. But the thread did not die. It was waiting, and now it is in your hands. I set the locket down on the podium. The silver caught the light. The question is not whether you believe me. The question is whether you will do something about it. The vote took 4 hours. When it was over, 7 pack leaders had been arrested. 11 others had resigned. Marcus Thorne sat in his chains, his face a mask of disbelief, as the guards led him from the chamber. He did not look at me. I did not look at him. I stood on the balcony of Caelan's estate. The city spread out below me in a grid of lights and shadow. The air was cold, carrying the smell of rain and stone. Darian stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, his dark eyes scanning the streets below. "You did it," he said. "No," I said. "We did it. My father started it. Kaelin carried it. I just finished it." Darian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What now?" I looked out at the horizon. The sky was clearing, the clouds breaking apart to reveal a pale, cold blue. I thought of the names on those pages, the ones who were still alive, the ones who were not. I thought of my father and the weight of what he had carried alone. "Now we find the rest," I said, "and we make sure no one else has to stand on a block." The wind picked up, pulling at my hair, cold against my cheeks. I did not shiver. I stood straight, my shoulders back, my hand resting on the silver locket at my throat. I was not nothing. I had never been nothing. I was the beginning of something, and the beginning was still being written.